Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be discussing optimizing our operations on data using reduce. Okay, so let's look at a simple example. We have an array of 4 elements. We're going to keep the even ones. We're going to map over the remaining elements and add 1 to it. Pretty simple. But we run into a problem. We create an array every time. If you didn't know, filter and map create a new intermediate array every time you run them. And we run into a separate problem. We're going to iterate twice. Filter and map will run over each element in the array for every time you call it. And there's another problem. What if the array were larger? We're dealing with 4 elements, but you can imagine if we were dealing with a few thousand, it might be different. Okay, so how would we handle something like that? Well, let's look at the example on the screen and walk through the code. So first, we're just going to import some functions. And we still have our array, just imagine that it's a larger array. And we're going to go ahead and call reduce on it. But as always, we need to think about what our accumulator is. It's an empty array. But why? Well, remember that empty arrays have no effect under addition. If you add an empty array to a non-empty array, it doesn't change the non-empty array. Okay, so let's think about the reducing function, or what other people refer to as the reducer. So in our parameter list, we have our accumulator and the current number, but I've named the accumulator to numbers, and I do that often if I think I need to add a little bit more context for what's actually going to be returned. And remember, we need to return a new accumulator. That is the job of the reducing function. But first, is the current number odd? That's our question, right? If it's not odd, well, then it's even. But if it is odd, it's not even, so we can just return the accumulator, right? We're going to skip the odd numbers. But if it is even, we're going to add 1 to it, right? That's our transformation function. And then after we add 1 to it, we're going to go ahead and add it to our accumulator and just return the accumulator. But now there's another problem. Concat will produce a new array. So every time you're doing this operation, you're going to return a new array, and you may not want that. So if you don't want that, you can do it with push as well, but it's going to look slightly different. So the push operation returns the new length of the array, which will be non-zero, because if you're adding something to even an empty array, well, it's going to be non-empty. And then we can combine this. This is a little trick. We can combine this with the double ampersand to return the right operand, or what is our accumulator. So we can just return numbers here. So in this example, if the left operand is truthy, right, then we can basically return whatever is on the right-hand side. And in our example, it's just numbers, which is the accumulator. And this happens for every item in the array. Remember, we'll run the reducing function over every item and just try to build up this accumulator at the very end. Okay, so if you don't have a lot of data that you're working on, I actually prefer the left side. I think it's easier to read. It's kind of going in that in order. You're doing your filter first, and then your map, and it's kind of easy to piece together. But one thing about how we're doing this on the right-hand side with reduce is that you can handle a lot more data. It's just more efficient to do it like this. And so another optimization is that we only create one intermediate array. On the left-hand side, notice that we call .filter and then .map. Remember, .filter and .map each create new intermediate arrays. And so that's 2 intermediate arrays you're creating, whereas with reduce, you're only creating 1. And the last thing is we only iterate once. Since we're only doing one reduce call, we go through each element in the array 1 time. But on the left-hand side, remember, filter and map will iterate each time through the array every time you call one of those. So this is just one example. Can you think of another? When you're doing your work, or if you just want to tinker, see if you can fit this in. Now, typically, If I see myself, a good rule of thumb is if I see myself making multiple filter or map calls, I'll take a step back and I'll say, well, is it appropriate to use reduce here? And you may find that it is. If you're dealing with a lot of data, you might want to use reduce. If you're dealing with a lot of data, you may want to use a for loop. It just depends. So just have that option in the back of your mind. Okay, again, if you like the video, leave me a comment below. Don't be afraid to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.